Before we begin, I would like to ask the audience to stand and raise your arms and fists to honor the brave Palestinians who have given their lives for their homeland and have become a symbol of struggle for us as well. And let's hope that they're able to, at some point, eject the aggressors from their homeland.
For the 1,650 Palestinians who've already been massacred, Presente.
Presente. Thank you.
Free Palestine.
Before I get underway, I would just like to say that it's an honor and a pleasure to appear before your group tonight, or this grouping tonight, and to write for Workers' World. Unbeknownst to maybe some of you, Dolores twisted my arm and forced me to do some writing for the paper. I've been an admirer of the newspaper for a number of years, going back to the early 60s, and I continue to rely upon it for accurate information that you just can't get anywhere else, and for its principled stand in support of the working class worldwide. I'm a little nervous, so please bear with me as I begin to warm up. And one of the things that has helped, thank you, I love you too. One of the things that is helpful to remember is that, especially here in the United States, under the foot of the imperialists, is that people are being deliberately kept ignorant, and they're being denied information that would tend to force them to question what's going on in society. And as the signs point out, Israeli apartheid made in the United States is true. The United States really was the model for how Israel has conducted itself since it declared itself as a state. We have to remember that this country was born out of the decimation of the Indian populations to be supplanted by the enslaved Africans. And to remember that is important because the hype tells us otherwise. And we're led to believe that this is the best thing since sliced bread, and that everybody here loves each other, and that this is the epitome of freedom and democracy. And nothing could be further from the truth. And it's important to keep a vigilant eye on such, because the bombardment of the propaganda is so thick and heavy. And I'm sure that you have members of your own family who believe that somehow or another we're misguided radicals going off in the wrong direction. And that's not true. One of the things that I'm reminded of in looking at the situation in Gaza and in Eric Garner is the fact that Malcolm pointed out some years ago in a phrase, they make the victim look like the criminal and the criminal look like the victim. And it applies to Eric Garner, and it applies to the brave Palestinians who are fighting to resist the complete takeover of their land. So I may hop around, but please bear with me. When Ban Ki-moon jumps up and tries to say that he's talking to the Palestinians, he's talking to the Israelis, he's really working for the United States government, and he's stalling, giving the Israeli time to complete their dastardly work. And when the bombs rain down on Palestine and people say they deny that they're attacking the civilians, that's exactly who they're attacking. They attack the civilians to break the resistance of the Palestinian people. And in wars generally, the highest number of casualties are usually men, women, and children, as opposed to combatants. Israel likes to present itself as being victimized, when in fact the United States government funds and supplies Israel with all the weapons that it needs to wage war. And as they continually bomb Palestine, it's a part of what I was mentioning, speaking with Deidre a few moments ago, about planned shrinkage. They want to reduce the population, they want to reduce the territory of the Palestinians, and they've done it successively since 1948 and even before. The pretext for their invasion, or this recent assault on Palestine, comes out of an alleged abduction and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers. That's a no-win situation, because they can create that story, which they probably have. They've been known to use false flag operations in the past, the same way that the United States used false flag operations to invade and take over territories not its own. Vietnam is a classic case in point. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution was used as the pretext to increase the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. And I remember vividly when I graduated from high school, being called down to the draft board at Fort Hamilton and asked to go through a physical exam so I could serve Uncle Sam. I deliberately answered all the questions wrong. And when the psychologist called me into his office, he said, well, you know, have you been to high school? I said, well, yeah, well, you know, I graduated from high school. You have my record in front of you. He says, well, why can't you answer the questions? Long story short, I said, I'm not going to put on a uniform and fight for Uncle Sam. And I used both the examples or the experiences of both Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali as some reinforcement for myself. So the psychologist talked to me for a while. I wouldn't answer the questions the way he wanted them answered. And so end result was he said, well, I'm going to find you qualified to serve in the military. And I said, well, you do what you have to do. I'm going to do what I have to do. And I became part of the anti-war movement and have been proud of it ever since. Just to digress for a minute, the water shutoffs in Detroit are again genocidal gestures. They have the right, they claim they have the right or the audacity to shut off water in Detroit, where within the stone's throw of Detroit, there are the Great Lakes. And aside from that, water is a human right, the way food is a human right. And no one should be denied access to food or water. And again, I recall some years ago where there was a conference in, I think it was Italy, and it was a UN-sponsored conference, and they wanted to draw up a proposal or a declaration, in effect, indicating that food is a human right. And the country that fought against that plank in this declaration was none other than the United States. You know. We must also remember, when it comes to Vietnam, that chemical and biological weapons were used against the Vietnamese people, so much so that today you have birth defects. The land itself has been forever tainted with these chemicals, particularly the use of Agent Orange. And the same thing in Iraq with the depleted uranium, and also the weapons being used in Palestine. They have their damaging effects on the ecology and on the birth of future children of Palestinian parents. In last week's New York Times, which I don't hold as gospel, there's a very moving picture of 2 young Palestinian brothers who had just lost their father to the bombing of by the Israeli planes and ordnance cannons, so to speak. But they lost their father in a bombing raid, and you can see the anguish on their faces. But yet, when you listen to the establishment news, there's no mention or no humanization of people who are losing their loved ones and having their lives, viciously disrupted like that. And it's unfortunate because, again, the way news is presented here in the United States, it's designed to enlist sympathy and support for Israel and to look at the Palestinians not as human beings entitled to their human rights, but as terrorists. Eric Garner did not deserve to be killed the way he did. The video of him being murdered by this detective or undercover cop Pantaleo is telling. Eric Garner's hands were up in the air. He was sneak attacked from behind with the death chokehold. He was wrestled to the ground, and as he was being wrestled to the ground, he said, "I can't breathe." No one, not the police nor the emergency medical services, came to his rescue. Bratton will issue all kinds of training procedures and sensitivity sessions for his police. He even wants to send a group of cops out to LA, notorious for abusing people, for more information about how to become better cops. If they respected the human rights of all of its citizens in New York, this wouldn't be necessary. And again, it's just a smokescreen, and we have to be mindful of that. One other thing that I'm reminded of when it comes to Malcolm X, he says, "The man doesn't care if you're for right or wrong, as long as you're for him. After that, he doesn't care what you're for." So while you may be a moral person, you may want to, in effect, live a life based on justice and a sense of right and wrong, as far as U.S. imperialism is concerned, that's the last thing that they're concerned about. I saw a picture of Obama and his daughters in the same issue of the Times, strolling along a grassy knoll and smiling and laughing to themselves. And Obama himself is a mass murderer. He's got blood on his hands. And because he's the first black president, we shouldn't cut him any slack. I'm very serious about that because the ruling class selected him and ran him for the office so that they could neutralize the opposition that was sure to come, given the foreign policy plans that they had in mind. Also the domestic policies. When it comes to the United States, the domestic policies of the United States are extensions of foreign policy and vice versa. I noticed in a current establishment magazine that came out earlier this week about the militarization of America's police force. I can remember back in the 60s where this movie series came on called SWAT. Yeah. I don't know if any people remember. You remember it? And there they were grooming the public to become accustomed to seeing heavily armed police attacking, less armed or less prepared groups of communities here in the United States. They were laying the groundwork for what's come to be now, is that you have a militarized police force who now have the endorsement to go into people's neighborhoods and knock down doors without asking, to use heavily armored vehicles. They call it special weapons and tactics. And under the pretext of the war on drugs, which gave them further power, and also after 9/11, which many people consider to have been a false flag operation to give the United States the cover necessary to erode the civil and human rights and political rights of people here in the United States, as well as wage war abroad, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, neither of which had anything to do with 9/11. The United States was built on the notion of exceptionalism, imperialism, white supremacy, and greed. And it's important to understand that its development became the model for none other than Adolf Hitler. In his book Mein Kampf, he credits the United States for having been his role model. And ones who always cry the loudest to denounce Hitler is none other than the United States. So not only is the United States dishonest about its own history, but they're also very hypocritical. Also, another thing that's important to remember is the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. It came a year to the day after his famous Riverside speech, his speech at Riverside Church in 1967 denouncing the Vietnam War. Recently, as you all may remember, they put a monument up to Martin Luther King in Washington, D.C. And again, that was an attempt to obfuscate or wipe away the fact that Martin Luther King, along with numerous other freedom fighters, were the targets of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI war known as COINTELPRO. Again, there's an effort to dilute and romanticize and mythologize American history. And it's important for us to remember the untruths of the American history, a legacy that they try to impose on citizens of this society. Just as Eric Garner lived in an occupied neighborhood, the Palestinians also live in an occupied territory. Imagine being in a confined area like that and having bombs and tank shells and soldiers invading your neighborhood. Women and children being subjected to this outrageous genocidal performance on the part of the United States. It's terrifying and it's obscene. Again, very often they will present Eric Garner as the one who was responsible for his own demise, even if he had been selling Lucy's. You want to take somebody's life for 50 cents? You know, when we know that they spend trillions upon trillions of dollars filling the coffers of their buddies and their banksters and their corporations that have tentacles around the world. It's not right. And it's important for us to remember this because, again, we're being led to believe that this country is the epitome of decency. Let me just wrap this up. It's helpful to keep in mind these notions or ideological pieces: manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, and imperial expansion, because these, again, form the bedrock of American society. And as the United States has gained power all over the world, and with the establishment of Israel, Israel is doing its bidding for the United States. Sure, it has its own interests in that region of the world, but that interest is eclipsed by the main interest or the main danger in the world, that being U.S. imperialism. So, without further ado, I think that it's important for us to remember that we should continue to protest, that we need to work harder at becoming better informed, we need to continue to spread the word, we need to continue to support Workers' World and the International Action Center, and as Public Enemy says, fight the power any way you can. Thank you. Just very quickly, I just want to thank everybody for your attention, and it was, again, an honor and a pleasure to be here and share my thoughts with you. And also, I came across a book earlier this week entitled The General's Son by Miko Peled. And long story short, this gentleman's father was a famous general in the Israeli army. And after he lost a niece, he began to question the whole reason for Israel's existence. And I think it's a very good book to get a personal perspective on people who grew up under a certain influence, but then began to question that influence, and then also decided to become a supporter of Palestine's independence. And again, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to supporting Workers' World and the International Action Center in the years to come. I know I look young for my age, because I take care of myself.
Thank you, Amy.